The golden dress lay on the bed, like a golden cage woven of someone else's will. The room was filled with the smell of perfume, lilies, and heavy silk. Maids scurried back and forth, adjusting folds, clicking stilettos, arranging snow-white gloves. The mother stood at the mirror, watching her daughter as if she were a porcelain doll destined to play the part of an obedient wife. Clarissa Bell sat at the window, but her gaze was somewhere far away, beyond Raven Creek, where dust and freedom merge into one. There was a mask of calm on her face, but everything clenched in her chest. Today she was to be the wife of Marshal Reeves, son of the sheriff himself, a man with a heart of ice and the eyes of a hunter. Everyone kept telling her how lucky she was, but no one heard her soul crying out for help. The groomsmen marched in the courtyard, heavy boots, rifles on their shoulders, a band tuning a trumpet before the ceremony. The whitewashed church, decorated with ribbons, seemed a trap. Everything about this day screamed power and tradition, but not love. Today she was to be his wife, but she didn't belong to him. She belonged to no one. Downstairs, in a spacious parlor with carved columns and the smell of expensive tobacco, two men were sealing the deal. Clarissa's father, a railroad magnate, was shaking hands with satisfaction with his future son-in-law. Marshal Reeves, tall, broad-shouldered, with a piercing gaze as cold as ice, stood motionless, as if the law itself were in human form. He didn't look at her as a woman, rather as a thing that already belonged to him by right. Everything in his posture spoke of possession and control. Within these walls, Clarissa was not a daughter, a fiancée, a human being, just a tool in someone's power game. She stood back, under the stares of the guest, feeling the ground beneath her feet as if it were going away. Inside, a cold wave of nausea, but her face remained still. She nodded as expected, and panic lurked in her eyes. Night descended on the mansion like a veil, heavy, stuffy. Clarissa's room was in semi-darkness, with only moonlight slipping through the old curtains. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a thin chain and pendant in her palm, a memory of her mother, the one who had once taught her to listen to her heart rather than her duty. The silence was broken by the cautious creak of the door. Lynetta entered, an old servant, a woman with a face that had more pain than wrinkles. She had once been a slave, but now she wore her freedom with dignity. Sitting down beside her, she bent down and whispered what no one would dare say aloud. In her hands was a rolled-up man's robe that had once belonged to her brother. Beneath it was a map of the area. Gifts, or salvation. Clarissa looked at it all as a chance born of night and faith. If your soul is screaming, listen to it, because it's not the voice of fear. It is the voice of life. Deep night had fallen, and storm clouds were gathering in the sky like harbingers of change. Clarissa, wrapped in a baggy shirt and pants, glided down the dark hallways of the mansion, trying not to make a sound. Her fingers trembled as she undid her father's snuff-box, the only thing she intended to take with her, a memento of the house that had become a prison. In the courtyard, hidden beneath the overhanging clouds, she quietly led the old mare out of the stable. In the distance she could hear the barking of dogs, the anxious ringing of church bells, preparing for a wedding that was not to be. She cast one last glance at the house, where life seemed alien and squeezing. Tears glistened in her eyes, but there was no choice, only a dash into the night, into the storm, into the sands, and the freedom that waited beyond the horizon. The horse rushed through the hills, clothes fluttering, Clarissa's face covered with dust. In her thoughts, confidence and fear at the same time. I don't know where this path leads, but I do know that at the end, I will be alive. I will be me. The searing sun blazed mercilessly overhead, churning the vast prairie, where the hot earth crackled with drought and the air swirled with hot dust. Clarissa rode an old, weary horse whose hooves clung to the stony ground. The wind tore at her hair, bombarding her face with grains of sand, her eyes squinting with pain and fatigue. A battle raged inside her, fear of the imposed future and a thirst for freedom as indomitable as the desert itself. Scenes from home flashed before her eyes. Her father's stern gaze, the cold silhouette of her fiancé, the weight of the golden dress she had thrown off for this frantic rush. Every memory pulled her back, but the deserted expanse beckoned forward, merciless and tantalizing at the same time. Clarissa knew that this journey was not just an escape, but a challenge to everything that kept her caged. The farther she travelled from home, the clearer she felt that freedom was worth every drop of sweat and pain. Vultures circled over the horizon, large, stiff birds with sharp talons and beaks, like the living embodiment of menace. Their cold eyes watched her every move, and the hum of their wings added to her anxiety. She raised her hand, trying to scare them away, waving and shouting into the void, but the birds did not retreat. They weren't just birds, they were a sign of death and fate, haunting her even as she fled. Each of their soaring seemed a challenge, a reminder. Freedom is not given for nothing. The horse stomped nervously, sensing her mistress's fear, but Clarissa clenched her teeth and gripped the reins tighter. Her heart was pounding, but she couldn't stop. A new life waited beyond the horizon, and no vulture would break her spirit. Night descended on the desert, bringing cold and thick darkness. Clarissa made a brief halt, lighting a weak fire that barely fended off the thickening shadows. In the distance, the howls of the wolves, the ghosts of the night against which she was powerless, sounded sparse at first, then more and more insistent. Their howls penetrated her heart, arousing fear mixed with despair and loneliness. Clarissa clutched at every handy object to branch, a rock ready to defend herself. But in her heart she knew that these were not just animals, but symbols of fate's trials. The loneliness grew more palpable, but with it grew determination. Wolves howled in the night, but she was not prey, but a fighter and a fugitive. The wind carried the odors of the prairie, and in this cruel world Clarissa was learning to survive. The canyon squeezed her like a trap with its stone walls, and every step echoed in the void. Suddenly, shadows emerged from behind the rocks, bandits, greedy for prey and captives. Their faces were covered with shawls, their eyes glittering with menace. Clarissa realized this was no accident. They wanted her back, to put her back in chains, to take the things she had taken with her. The fight erupted instantly. Blows, attempts to break free, desperate flight. Heat and exhaustion pressed with every breath. Her body grew weaker, her mind clouded with thirst and fatigue. At the last moment, almost falling senseless, she broke free and rushed into the sands, where the desert itself seemed ready to swallow the fugitive. The heat burned her skin, her thoughts became confused, and the world began to blur. She stumbled on the hot sand and collapsed face down, unconscious. The blinding light of the scorching sun was replaced by thick darkness. In that silent moment, a shadow appeared above her, a tall, stout man with a cold but watchful gaze. Tengala, a Navajo warrior whose presence inspired fear and calm at the same time. His face was stern, but there was caution and respect in his movements. He gently supported her head and helped her up, as if he knew that she was not just a fugitive, but a person with a hard fate. He gave her water without words, and at that moment there was an unspoken bond between them, two worlds, so different, now intertwined by fate. Clarissa lay still weakened, but a spark of hope flickered in her eyes. Her savior, the silent Indian, was her last chance for a new life, for the freedom she longed for. The sun was rising over the desert, coloring the sands with warm hues. A light breeze ruffled her hair, and it seemed as if nature itself was whispering of the beginning of a new journey, a journey where the past no longer held sway. Tengala moved ahead, confidently making his way along the narrow canyon paths, his steps light and precise, as if he were an integral part of this harsh land. High cliffs rose on their sides, casting deep shadows that offered relief from the blazing, merciless sun. The wind glided between the rocks, bringing the rare scents of desert plants, silvery xerophytes and thorny bushes that resisted drought. These quiet sounds, the rustling of leaves, the whistling gust, seemed to accompany their journey, filling the air with a mysterious atmosphere. Clarissa followed him, feeling every unevenness of the path beneath her feet. Her heart beat uneasily, intermittently, a mixture of apprehension and faint relief. The fear of trusting a stranger restrained her movements, but the thought of turning back seemed tantamount to a surrender to the fate she was desperately trying to avoid. Clarissa's attentive eyes searched the shadows for shadows that might conceal a threat. Yet with each step, she felt herself leaving behind her old life, the golden dress, the ringing church bells, and the words that had turned her into a commodity. In the distance, on the tops of the cliffs, light clouds of wind-blown dust rose, as if the desert itself were watching them, testing the fragile bond between the fugitive and the warrior. The landscape seemed both vast and narrow, a ruthless nature, where the strongest survive, where every rock could be both a shelter and a trap. Clarissa knew that this journey was not going to be easy, but there was something new, appealing and unexplored about it. Tengala didn't say a word, concentrating on the safety of his companion. From time to time, he looked back, checking to see if she was following him. There was a hardness in his gaze, but with it a surprising tenderness, unusual for a rugged warrior, that she feared. This man was more than just a desert warrior. He was her protection, and perhaps the beginning of the freedom she sought. She didn't know yet if she could trust this silent man, but she knew one thing. There was no turning back. The canyon closed around them, hiding them from the eyes of others. Here, among the stone walls, a new chapter of her life was beginning, full of challenges, but also hope. Tengala led Clarissa to his hut, a small one hidden in a crevice between the rocks. It was a humble dwelling, walls of roughly hewn planks, a hide-covered roof, and only a few necessities that spoke of a life where everything and every movement was valued. No frills, just the essentials. A bowl of water, a mat of straw, a neatly stacked knife and bow. There was nothing in this place to distract or irritate, only calm and simplicity. Tengala did not invade her personal space uninvited, showing respect and patience. His eyes rarely lingered on her face, but every movement spoke of care and attention. He didn't ask questions. He let Clarissa decide when and what to say, giving her time to come to terms with her new reality. In his presence, she felt for the first time that she was not a prey, not a toy in someone else's hands, but a person capable of choosing her own destiny. Clarissa watched him warily, but also with a subtle appreciation. There was a subtle tension brewing between them, a mixture of caution and growing trust, an undercurrent of sympathy not yet spoken, but palpable in the air. There was something deep in that silence, a promise of protection and respect, without intrusiveness or pressure. The first hours in the cabin were spent in silence, interrupted only by the sound of the wind behind the stone walls and the slight crackling of the fire. It was an island of safety for Clarissa, where she could forget her fear for a moment and try to understand who this mysterious desert warrior was, who had become her salvation and perhaps the beginning of a new life. Tengala gently dressed the wounds on her arm. His movements were confident and careful, without unnecessary words. Suddenly his gaze lingered on her wrist. There was a barely visible mark, the scorched crest of the Bell family. The mark was more than just a drawing. It carried history, memories, and pain, reawakening old wounds in him. The warrior's face changed, his eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, his tension heightened. To Tengel, the name of the Bells sounded like an echo of the long and bitter feud between his tribe and the men of that family. Conflicts, losses, and resentments, all of which had not let him go until now. There were conflicting feelings in his soul, a desire to trust and help the new guest, and a dark suspicion that she might be connected to his enemies. Sensing the change in the atmosphere, Clarissa remained silent. She did not immediately dare to reveal her true identity, calling herself simply Claire. It was her shield, an attempt to hide her connection to a family whose reputation could ruin everything she was trying to build. A silence hung in the air, unspoken, but keenly felt. Tengala wrestled with himself. His duty to protect the tribe was at odds with what he saw before him. A tired, frightened girl who was looking for salvation. In this inner conflict, there was hope that fate had brought them together for a reason, and that trust could transcend ancient enmities. Anxiety and determination flared within Clarissa. To reveal her name meant jeopardizing a fragile trust. She chose a mask, the simple name, Claire, as if protecting herself with an invisible shield. Her thoughts were filled with fear of rejection, but the desire to survive and be free was stronger. The struggle between truth and falsehood had become a struggle for a new life, a vital and painful one for her. In the silence of the hut, her heart beat loudly, as if trying to confess that it was not yet ready to come out. Tengala listened to her silently, without surprise or judgment. His restrained silence sounded careful not to ask unnecessary questions. This silent acceptance was the first brick in the bridge of trust being built between them. All around, the stone walls of the canyon seemed stark but secure, reflecting their new alliance. The desert wind played with the grains of sand, creating a slight rustle, a reminder that even in the harshest of conditions, life and hope can spring up. Clarissa felt that here, among these stone giants and desert stillness, they had found more than shelter. It was a chance to start anew, without the fears and shackles of the past. The wind continued to whistle softly over the canyon, a symbol of the new paths opening before them. She stood at the edge of the canyon, staring at the fiery red sunset that was slowly turning the desert into shadow. In that blazing light, her feelings mingled. The faint hope of salvation and freedom intertwined with the cold fear of the unknown. Determination and doubt struggled in her soul, like sand that the wind carries away and picks up again. Tengala stood silently beside her, his calm gaze staring into the distance, a protection she could not yet comprehend. He was her guardian, and her mystery in this new world. The wind whispered in the stone walls, and everything was filled with a quiet anxiety, an expectation of challenge and change. But it was in this silence that Clarissa felt for the first time that her journey was not over. It was just beginning. Tengala awoke at dawn, when the first rays of the sun cautiously touched the canyon peaks. His morning rituals were simple, but filled with respect for the land and the spirits that lived around him. He carefully cleaned his weapons, bow and knife, cared for his body, washing his face in the stream whose cool water awakened all the senses. Clarissa watched his every movement, noticing how his life was tied to the rhythms of nature. Hunting, foraging for food, honoring the spirits. There was no luxury or excess here, only genuine necessity and harmony. To her, accustomed to golden halls and silk dresses, it seemed alien and harsh, but there was a beauty in it, an honesty and simplicity that made it impossible to hide behind masks and pretense. She saw how Tengel respected every stone, every plant, how he listened to the rustle of the wind and the sounds of the desert as if he understood its language. This world was completely different, unbridled and honest. There was no room for lies, only survival and truth. Each day, Clarissa became more and more immersed in this new way of life, and its harsh truth awakened in her a long-forgotten sense of freedom. She began to realize that behind the rigidity and strict rules of the tribe lay a deep connection to the world that she had missed in the past. Watching Tengala, she learned to see not only outward strength, but an inner wisdom that required no words, only action and respect. The world of her former life, with its glitter and pretense, was receding into the shadows. Here, among the rocks and winds, a new Clarissa was born, a woman who was learning to trust and realize that true strength was not in wealth or power, but in honesty and humility before the elements. Each day brought her closer to realizing that this man and this path could become not just a refuge for her, but a home. The fire burned evenly, casting a warm glow on the stones and faces. All around, the night silence of the desert, pierced only by the crackling of wood, the slight rustle of sand, and the distant sighs of wind. The silence was not empty. There was a tension growing in it, as if the night itself were listening for what was to be said. Clarissa sat beside Tengala, feeling a strange closeness that could not be called friendship, but was no longer enmity. The warm breath of the fire warmed her skin, and her inner anxiety seemed to dissolve in the silence. He spoke suddenly, slowly, without looking in her direction. Tengala spoke of the women of his tribe, how they feared the white men, thinking they were harbingers of trouble. To them, a white woman is not a guest, but a sign of destruction. There was no condemnation in his voice, only bitterness and weariness that prejudice had become too familiar. And yet, looking at her, he saw not fear, but a fire that could not be subdued. Tengal's words were still in the air, but his gaze had already slid to Clarissa, not with reproach, not with judgment, but with that rare scrutiny in which one senses caring. It was as if he were looking for confirmation of his thoughts, and he found it in her eyes. There was no guilt there, no slavish submission. There was determination, pain, and a bright, living flamer bride who refused to be a thing, refused to live a life not her own. That look changed everything. There was something soft, almost elusive in the warrior's stern features. Respect, born not of duty, but of the fact that he saw her as a human being, not a stranger. He no longer looked at her as a threat. There was acceptance in that look, albeit without words, albeit still with caution. Clarissa caught the change, and for the first time allowed herself to breathe a little more freely. The trust was not yet firmly established, but it was growing. There was still anxiety inside, but with him she felt for the first time that it was not a crime to be herself. The flames between them continued to dance, casting shadows on the ground as Clarissa finally lowered her gaze. Tengal's words, his silent acceptance, his gaze without judgment, all of it created a crack in her, through which a voice long held back by fear burst. She exhaled, as if tearing away the pain, and whispered a confession she had not dared to utter even to herself until now. She had run away from her own wedding. The words sounded simple, but inside they burned like a wound that had been torn open too soon. Her voice trembled, broken, as if in shame, but there was a determination in it not to hide any longer. She didn't tell everything, just bits and pieces, about the dress, about the chains, about the golden cage they kept her in, calling it happiness, about the man she'd never chosen, and about running away with no clear purpose, only the cry of her soul. Tengala remained silent, not interrupting, not asking questions. His face remained impenetrable, but there was more in his eyes than any words could say. Surprise, reflected pain, and most of all, respect. He saw before him not a fugitive, but a woman who had been able to refuse the fate that had been forced upon her. There was a long silence after her confession, but it was no longer frightening. It was filled with new meaning, as if the night itself were listening to what was being said, wrapping them carefully in a canopy of silence. Neither of them moved, didn't disturb the fragile peace in which it was suddenly easier to breathe. Something had changed between them, not in words, not in gestures, but simply in the way the heart responded to the heart. Clarissa felt a little warmer in her chest, not because he answered or comforted. No, he just stayed. He listened, didn't turn away, didn't judge, and that was enough. In his silence there was participation, rare, deep, stronger than any phrase. They were both wounded, in their own way. She by her soul, fractured by expectation and duty. He by the memory of enmity, betrayal, and lost land. They were united by this pain, not as a weakness, but as a foundation for something new. The sky above them was scattered with thousands of stars, as if the world itself were a reminder that even in darkness there is light. The wind gently touched the edges of the blanket, and the fire was dying down but not dying out. It was a night without promise, but with the feeling that everything was still possible, if not tomorrow, then some day. And in that silence, an alliance began, unspoken, unbound by anything but mutual understanding. Night finally enveloped the canyon, swallowing the outlines of the rocks and softening their sharp shapes. The world around her seemed to stand still, giving way to a silence in which everything was clear without words. Clarissa sat motionless, staring into the dying fire, and for the first time in a long time she felt that she was not alone. There was someone who saw her not as a thing, not as a stranger, but as a human being. It was enough to ignite something warm in her chest, an almost forgotten sense of belonging. Fear still lived in her, lurking in the depths of her thoughts, whispering of danger and possible pain. But there was another voice rising above the fear, a voice of determination, an inner fire that kept her from hiding in her mask again. Her life no longer belonged to others. Every step she took was now her own choice, and even if the path ahead was difficult, she was ready to go. The wind rustled softly through the dry grass and slopes, as if the desert itself was leaning over them, blessing this new union. Fragile, but real. The stars twinkled overhead, infinitely distant and yet close, as if they were watching her with kindly attention. It was a night of beginnings, not bright and festive, but quiet, tentative, like the first sprouts among the rocks. And in that silence, Clarissa found not answers, but most importantly, hope. On the other side of the desert, in a house with carved columns, where violins sang instead of the wind, and the walls held the smell of old port and the spirit of family pride, a morning very different from the one that had greeted Clarissa came. Where gold glittered in gilded frames and floors creaked under shoes unaccustomed to dust, the news of her disappearance fell like a stone into standing water. The groom, a man of influence, authority, and coldness, received the news from the mouth of a trembling servant. His reaction was not violent, it was worse, a silent, icy rage that made the servant recoil as if bitten by a snake. This man was not accustomed to rejection. He did not tolerate disobedience. For him, marriage was not a union, but a contract where Clarissa was a piece of property necessary to strengthen his position. Her running away didn't just disrupt the order, it made him look weak, and that he could not forgive. There was an anxious bustle in the house, but not a single member of the family cried, not a single word of concern for Clarissa, only muffled murmurs, shame, scandal, what society would say. The mother spoke of reputation, the father of legacy. Their daughter was a symbol for them, a thing, and her disappearance was a spit in the face of everything they had built up over the years. Their reaction gave away the most important thing. They weren't losing a person, they were losing a facade. The groom did not wait. He called the sheriff, an old acquaintance, a man with a flexible conscience, if he paid enough. He arrived quickly, listened to a dry recounting of events, received the required amount of money and orders to return it at any price. No conditions, no reservations. Find it, return it, punish if necessary. Deep down, the groom wasn't looking for forgiveness or reconciliation. All he wanted was to regain control, to reclaim that which had dared to leave. His love was only an illusion. The true feeling was rage. It burned in him like fire in the wind, and nothing could stop it. The hunt was on. For a real hunt to begin, there had to be a reason. A runaway bride is a scandal, yes, but not a crime, which meant no armed pursuit, no law enforcement, no crossing reservation lines. The groom knew how the world worked. Power loves excuses, especially ones that look noble. He made them. The day after Clarissa disappeared, the news spread through the neighborhood. The family jewels, necklaces, earrings, brooches, everything that had been kept in her fiancé's house for centuries, passed down from mother to daughter, had disappeared with her. Allegedly, she took them secretly, hid them in a travel bag, and ran away with the intention of selling them, hiding, starting a new life. This version was picked up by servants, neighbors, even distant relatives. Those who had the right words put in their mouths and an extra dollar in the palm of their hands. The lie, repeated loudly and confidently, quickly became the truth. The newspapers reprinted it with headlines like "Fugitive" or "Thief" and "Disgrace to a Noble Family." In the saloons she was talked of as a woman with two faces, an angel in sight and a devil at heart. All this was carefully orchestrated. Every rumor, every whisper in the crowd worked for the purpose, not just to return Clarissa, but to defame her, to deprive her of sympathy, to break her image, to make her look guilty. The sheriff had all the necessary paperwork, witness statements, a list of stolen items, a respectable gentleman's signature. His actions were now legal. He could cross the borders of Indian lands under the pretext of investigating a theft. No one would object. No one would rise to her defense. After all, she was now not a runaway bride, but a criminal, a thief to be apprehended. The lie has done its job, cleared the way for revenge. As soon as rumors of the theft took hold in people's minds, the groom sprang into action. He wasn't one to wait for favor from the law. He bought action. Money, connections, influence, everything was set in motion. Clarissa's house, yesterday a mute rebuke, was now a military base. Maps, weapons, ammunition were brought in. The sheriff was covering it up with a paper trail of legality, but it was clear to everyone that this was not an investigation, but a real hunt. The squad was assembled quickly. It included not just lawmen, but people who had a score to settle with the Indians, ex-soldiers, bounty hunters, small landowners who felt that the reservations had taken away their best land. They didn't wait for a trial. They wanted blood. Some went for money, some for a sense of power, and some simply out of spite, fueled by rumors of a white woman who had run off to the savages with other people's jewelry. The groom was not stingy. Horses, ammunition, fresh supplies, even payment for each day in the saddle, all this made his march for justice look like a hired expedition. He had no intention of going himself, preferring to observe from afar, but in every fighter one could feel his orders: find, capture, bring, at any cost. Among Clarissa's scattered possessions, they found an old map, a gift from a governess who had once been interested in the geography of the wilderness. On it, among the curves and markings, the South Canyon was circled with a bold ink dot. No one knew why she'd kept that map. Maybe it was an instinct. Maybe she hadn't thrown it away. But now it had become evidence, proof, that Clarissa was headed that way. That was reason enough to move. The squad left before noon, with loud words and heavy footsteps. Dusty city streets, gossip and empty excuses were left behind. Ahead was the border of Navajo territory they had no intention of respecting. It wasn't justice that drove them. It was a lust for control. The groom had gotten his. Now she would be hunted down like a beast, and every horseshoe that struck the rock was a harbinger of trouble. Meanwhile, far from the noise and din of the troop, Clarissa and Tengala were returning to their hiding place, hidden among the branching pines and stone ledges. The place was silent, with only the wind caressing the crowns of the trees and the babbling brook in the distance. It seemed a world far removed from anxiety and suspicion, where time flowed according to its own laws, not subject to fear and cruelty. Clarissa increasingly felt something new in herself, a calmness that came with each day in the tribe, with each breath of freedom. She was learning to listen to nature, to understand its signs and rhythms. Her heart was beginning to rebuild itself, gradually releasing the weight of the past. But at the same time, an elusive sense of unease was awakening deep inside, as if an invisible wind had brought a harbinger of coming change into their world. One night Clarissa had a dream, dark, vague, filled with vague shadows. She saw a fire that devoured not only the forest, but also the quiet paths they walked, felt cold eyes watching her every move. The awakening was abrupt, her breathing quickened. Nearby, Tengala slept peacefully, but he too noticed how nature around him seemed to tense up. The birds stopped singing, the insects fell silent, and the night wind, usually rustling softly, took on a hostile tone. Such signs could not be ignored. Tengala sensed that something was close, elusive and dangerous. He watched the footprints the wind and earth left behind, tried to read the messages the earth itself was sending them. Their lives that had seemed so far removed from the white man's world were now rising to the surface, along with the shadows of the past. The time was coming when they would have to face not only themselves, but also what was beyond their control. But for now, day had not yet come. There were only the sounds of the night, full of mystery and expectation. Clarissa closed her eyes and tried to absorb the silence, to gain strength. She realized that their journey was just beginning, and there would be more than one battle, more than one trial ahead. This peace was like the calm before the storm, like a light breath before leaping into the unknown. The silence that Clarissa and Tengala had carefully kept was broken by unexpected news. One of the tribe's hunters, a man stern and careful, had returned with troubling words. On the outskirts, among the clefts and brushwood, he had seen strangers armed men, eager for rumors and news. They asked about the white woman who had appeared in their lands as a sign of change, a challenge to the established order. Word spread quickly among the elders and warriors of the tribe. The meeting with strangers had always been a cause for wariness, but now there was a deeper danger. Fear and suspicion, like a shadow, covered the hearts of those who did not want change. Many made no secret of their displeasure at her presence. To them, Clarissa was not just a stranger, but a messenger of trouble, a disturbance to the balance they had maintained for centuries. The tribal council gathered in the shade of a mighty oak tree. The elders exchanged glances, their words measured and careful. Tengala, feeling the weight of responsibility, rose to stand in defense of the one who had become part of their world. He knew this was not just a girl who had run away from her destiny. This was someone whose spirit was full of pain and strength, whose choices had become a challenge to everyone around her. Doubts still raged inside Tengel. He wasn't sure he was ready to openly confront the outsiders, that he could protect Clarissa from those who would come with weapons and deceit. But in his heart, he knew that this test was inevitable, and not only her fate, but their lives together would depend on how he would survive this first blow. Clarissa heard whispers and accusations that penetrated even the most secluded corners of the tribe. She was accused of stealing, family jewels passed down through the generations, though she herself had taken nothing of the sort. It was like a knife to the heart. The lies cut deeper than she could have imagined. The pain of the injustice was mixed with despair, but also with determination. She knew she would not back down, that the truth would come out one day. Tension rose as if before a storm. The air was filled with dark forebodings, and the shadows grew longer and denser. At that moment, Clarissa realized that her escape was only the beginning, and now there was not only a fight for freedom, but also a fight for trust, for her name and the right to be herself in this new, harsh world. Anxiety and tension filled the air, like harbingers of a storm looming over the quiet world of the tribe. Clarissa could feel the weight of the gaze turned toward her, not only with suspicion, but with growing wariness. A realization grew in her heart. Her presence, though it brought new life and hope, could cause danger to those who had taken her under their protection. In the back of her mind, a quiet voice of reason sounded, urging her to leave while she still had the chance, to take the pain and misunderstanding with her so as not to jeopardize her new friends and those who had put their trust in her. This decision did not come easily. She knew that escape was the only way, but to retreat again meant surrendering to fear, meant losing what had already begun to blossom inside. Tengel watched her, his gaze deep and calm, devoid of words but filled with strength and support. He didn't demand explanations. He didn't judge or suggest easy ways out. His actions spoke for themselves. She was no longer just a stranger or a fugitive. She was part of the tribe, part of the story they were writing together, weaving their own destinies into it. He stepped closer, placed his hand firmly on her shoulder, a gesture full of promise and faith. In that simple touch was a willingness to share her hardships and dangers, to protect her and help her fight for the future. This silent union was stronger than any words or vows. Clarissa felt the knot of fear and doubt tighten, and at the same time the flame of inner strength flared. She knew now she was not alone. And even if the road ahead of them was full of challenges, she was ready to face it with an open heart. The tribal council reconvened to discuss the next step. Maybe they would have to go deeper into the impassable canyons, hide from the eyes of strangers, find shelter in the labyrinths of stone walls. Or maybe it was time to prepare for defense, to gather, to become one, to meet the threat with weapons in hand. The night was deepening, the stars shimmering brighter overhead, and in that silence a new beginning was dawning. Clarissa and Tengala, Two worlds, two fates colliding and intertwined, stood on the threshold of change. Their path was not yet clear, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back. Their story was just beginning. The first signs of the impending storm were barely noticeable. The wind that usually whispered through the branches of the trees suddenly became sharp and piercing, as if warning of impending danger. The sand seemed to begin to heave from afar, rising in waves that quickly approached the edge of the camp. Clarissa, accustomed to the peace of the canyon and the stillness of the night, felt an uneasiness play in her chest. Something in that wind carried a message of change, as if nature herself was preparing for a storm, not only outside, but within herself. Tengala, attentive to the slightest signs of his surroundings, was quick to notice the change. His gaze became sharp, and his movements became determined. He knew that hiding and finding shelter was the only way to escape the coming chaos. The storm threatened to sweep everything in its path, blurring the lines between day and night, between safety and danger. Every gust of wind, every rustle of sand and stones under their feet reminded them of how unstable and fickle this world is. At that moment, it was as if a storm came to the earth, not only outside, but also inside the characters themselves. Strong feelings and fears, long hidden, began to awaken. This sandstorm was a reflection of Clarissa and Tengala's inner turmoil, a chaos that could not be stopped, but had to be faced and walked through together. They staggered toward the cave, a shelter from the indomitable elements. The air was filled with a dense, almost palpable energy of anxiety that gave every movement a special importance. The wind tore small leaves and thin branches apart. The sand whistled and swirled as if the earth itself were trying to remind him that the time of tranquility was over. And in the midst of this turmoil, fighting the storm, Clarissa felt that life was taking over again. But now she was not alone. Tengala was there, with his strength and patience, ready to face any storm with her. The cave greeted them with cool darkness, a shelter from the merciless storm outside. It was cramped inside, the air heavy with dampness and the echoes of the wind that tore at the ground outside their shelter like a great beast. The sound of sand and the whistle of wind came through here in jerky gusts, making the walls of the cave hum as if nature itself had enclosed them in a separate, inaccessible world. There was no sun here, no outsider's gaze, only darkness and the sounds of the raging elements. Clarissa and Tengala stood side by side, feeling the space between them shrink and the tension grow. The tightness and darkness seemed to expose feelings that were hard to put into words. In this shelter, separated from the world, their inner world was revealed. Every breath, every glance took on a special meaning. A storm raged outside the cave walls, but inside reigned another element, a budding bond, cautious yet irresistible. The wind never stopped warring with the sand, bringing with it sounds like the whispering of ancient desert spirits. The sound was both frightening and mesmerizing, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could be found if you listened carefully. Clarissa sensed that now, in this dark and cramped space, something new, real, and deep was beginning to emerge between them. The tightness of the cave and the noise of the approaching storm seemed to compress the space around them, making every breath louder, every movement more significant. In this lull where time seemed to stop, there was an unspoken tension between Clarissa and Tengala, a mixture of fear, hope, and desire that was hard to ignore. Her heart beat faster, but not from the danger outside, but from something new and warm that was beginning to awaken inside. In that darkness, Clarissa took the first step, a kiss, simple yet powerful, like a cry of the soul piercing the darkness of the past. It was not just a gesture of passion, but a symbol of resistance to what had held her back before, and the beginning of a journey to freedom. That kiss said, "I choose to be here, now, with you, not in the cage I escaped from." There was something defiant yet vulnerable about it, a mixture of strength and tenderness. Tengala didn't respond with words, nor did he rush things. His restraint did not detract from the depth of feeling that was read in his every look, in every touch. His respect for her was obvious. He did not seek to possess. He wanted to understand and support her. There was a bond of trust and acceptance between them, where Clarissa's past no longer held power, giving way to a new beginning. That moment was the turning point, not a bright explosion, but a quiet but strong knot connecting two hearts. In the storm around them and in the cavernous silence, a story was born in which every kiss was a step toward freedom, toward a life they could build together. Here, under the rumbling of the sandy winds, their souls found each other. The darkness of the cave became more than just a shelter from the storm. It became a space where their deepest secrets were revealed. After the kiss, when the sound of the wind faded to a barely audible howl, Clarissa felt it was time to reveal what she had been carrying deep inside, hiding even from herself. Her confession sounded not in words, but in the thoughts and feelings of the narrator, a secret she had been hiding from the world and from her very soul. She was pregnant. The child was the child of a man whose name evoked in her only pain and hatred. It was like an invisible wound she carried inside, a source of fear and anxiety. Hope and terror fought in her heart, hope for a new life and fear that this secret would destroy everything she had been able to build. Fear of judgment and rejection bound her like the chains of the past she was trying to break. The very darkness of the cave seemed to shrink around her, reflecting her inner struggle and pain. But Tengala was there. His silence was not empty. It was filled with deep understanding and a silent agreement to accept her as she was. His gaze was not judgmental, nor did it demand an explanation. It was a willingness to stand by her side, even if the road ahead was thorny. In that silent recognition, there was a determination to protect, to support, and to walk together through any challenge. Clarissa's inner world trembled at this openness, but for the first time she felt that she was not alone in her struggle. The silence of the cave became their ally, and the storm was just the backdrop for the birth of a new beginning where secrets ceased to be a burden and turned into strength. Time seemed to stop in the cave, allowing them to feel each other more deeply than ever before. After Clarissa opened up about her pain and fears, an invisible thread of trust developed between them that intertwined their souls. This moment was a transition to a new level, from caution and mistrust to a willingness to accept and understand. She saw in Tengel not only a warrior and protector, but a man with wounds of his own to walk through the storm with. His silent presence, his compassion-filled gaze, said more than any words could. Both realized they were not perfect, both carrying the weight of the past, but together able to find strength for a new path. The sandstorm outside gradually subsided, as if reflecting what was happening inside them. The wind subsided, the sand settled, and the world outside the cave became calm. In this calm, there was a sense of reconciliation, not only with external circumstances, but also with their own fears and hopes. Together they felt that they were ready not just to survive, but to live, despite the difficulties and the unknown. This quiet union, born in the depths of the cave, was the beginning of something new and real, a bond that could become a strong foundation for both of them. When the last gusts of wind died down and the sand stopped whirling, Clarissa and Tengel cautiously stepped out of the cave. The world around them seemed different, fresh, as if after a long rain, when the earth had come to life and breathed fully. The sky had cleared, and the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the scattered clouds, illuminating the rocks with a soft golden light. At that moment, they felt that a new chapter of their lives was beginning, not easy and cloudless, but filled with hope and strength, which they now drew from each other. Each step forward was a step toward the unknown, but now they were not afraid to walk together. There was a storm behind them, and an uncertain but open path ahead. There was a determination in each of their souls to face the trials, to keep their trust, and to protect what was dear. There was a quiet confidence in their gazes. Despite all the dark shadows of the past, they had found a light that would help them endure. And as the desert began to return to its familiar silence, a new strength was emerging within them, a willingness to face the future, whatever it might be. It was the beginning of a journey on which they were no longer alone. The path to the tribe stretched through narrow paths, hiding thorny bushes and mighty pines in the shadows, carpeting the ground with a soft carpet of needles. Tengala led Clarissa confidently, her eyes fixed on the homeland of his people, but her heart was filled with mixed feelings. Here she found peace after danger, but at the same time she felt a shadow of foreignness, as if she had become a guest in a world that was alien and unpredictable. The voices and laughter of the tribe filled the air in the distance, and with each step they grew louder. Clarissa realized she was now an outsider, a woman from a world that had long resisted the coming of the whites. In the eyes of those who had lived here for centuries, she was an enigma, an uninvited guest, and much depended on how she would be greeted. When they reached the center of the tribe, the mood changed. The people quieted, stopped moving, as if time had slowed down. The old men, with stern wrinkles and hard eyes, scrutinized her, and the young men, looking around discreetly, whispered. There was tension. Some saw her as a threat, some as a challenge to the usual order. Clarissa felt hundreds of eyes watching piercingly behind her, bright, wary, filled with distrust. She wasn't just a fugitive, she was now part of an alien world that hardly wanted to accept her. This moment, as she stood among her new people, was full of uncertainty. There were many trials ahead, but there was also hope, a thin ray of hope that gave her the strength to go on, even if her heart was torn with fear. Tengala stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder with her, firm and confident, as if promising to protect and support her no matter what. His people viewed her through a prism of prejudice and fear, but he believed this was the beginning of a new story for them to write together. In the shadow of the great round council house, gathered on a rise among the trees, Tengala leads Clarissa forward to the chief and elders of the tribe. Their faces are lit by the soft light of the setting sun, but their gazes are full of cold severity and deep wariness. This is not just a formal welcome. Her future among a people whose traditions do not forgive outsiders is being decided here. The chief, a tall man with a silvery mane and eyes that sparkle with wisdom and the weight of years, looks at her with obvious doubt. The elders surrounding him shift their gazes and whisper, expressing hidden anxiety and distrust. They see Clarissa not as a woman, but as a sign of change, a threat to the way things are, especially now that rumors of approaching whites with their greed for land and freedom are becoming more and more real. There is a fear in these views. How can one trust a person who comes from a world of enemies? How can we not see her as a symbol of danger and destruction? Every movement, every gesture is an object of thought and suspicion. Clarissa feels the weight of this tension, which seems to compress the space around her, preventing her from breathing freely. Talk of the coming trials, of the struggle for the tribe's survival, of the need for cohesion in the face of external threats makes the atmosphere even more tense. The chiefs see her as a risk, but Tengala, with restraint and confidence, asserts that she is not an enemy. She is part of their common destiny, an unexpected but important link in a chain of events that will change the future. Silent tension continues to hang in the air, as if everyone is waiting to see who will take the first step toward trust or reject the hope of a new path. After the first formal reception was over, the tension in the air not only did not ease, it became more palpable, like a dark cloud hanging over the tribal council. The elders, accustomed to guiding the fate of the people, began to openly express their concerns. Their voices sounded firm, sometimes even harsh, each striving to convey his opinion, as if the very essence of the tribe was being decided. Many made no secret of the fact that they saw Clarissa as a threat. For them, she was a reminder of those who hunger for land and power, who destroy traditions and sacred customs. The stories of the white men who came with war and greed sounded like ancient legends that continue to come alive in each generation, feeding fear and distrust. The words of the elders were woven into threads of prejudice, strengthening the wall between them and Clarissa. Some recalled past conflicts where outsiders had brought only destruction. Others worried that the white woman's presence might provoke internal strife and undermine the unity of the tribe. This division was becoming more and more visible, as if the ground beneath their feet was beginning to crack. Tengala stood in the center of this tumultuous scene, realizing that his position was now dangerous. Supporting Clarissa could lead to isolation and even loss of respect among his own. But there was determination in his gaze. He couldn't leave her alone, couldn't turn his back on what had become part of his life. Through the tensions and disagreements, there was a sense in the air of an impending storm, not only external but also internal, a storm that could destroy the tribe's foundations, or, on the contrary, open the way to a new beginning. In the midst of the tense council, when the voices of the elders were becoming more and more heated, and it seemed that the discord might turn into open conflict, a figure whom everyone respected and feared, the old shamaness, stepped out of the shadows. Her steps were slow but full of power, and her gaze pierced the space as if she saw more than ordinary eyes. She raised her hand, asking for silence, and gradually the entire council fell silent. At that moment, there was a sacred silence in the air, as if those present sensed that something important was coming, something beyond earthly disputes and commonplace fears. The shamaness began to tell of a vision that had visited her during a nighttime journey into the spirit world. She spoke of a pale bride that the spirits had brought to their tribe. According to her, this was not just a woman. It was a sign, a message of a new destiny, of changes to come for all the people. Her words penetrated deeply, dissolving in the souls of her listeners. In them sounded ancient wisdom that had survived the centuries, and the certainty that what was happening was not an accident. She explained that Clarissa had not come to destroy, but to renew, to intertwine destinies and forge a new path where the old and the new could coexist. Many on the council reacted in a variety of ways, from doubt and distrust to mild respect. But even the most stubborn began to think, for the shamaness's words came from a depth of tradition and belief that they could not ignore. This scene was the turning point. The air filled with disagreement and fear was softened by the light of hope, some thin bridge between the past and the future. Though no decision had yet been made, there was a sense in the tribe's soul that history was about to take a new turn. After the words of the shamaness, the story of the signs and symbols accompanying the prophecy began. Her voice was filled with respect for ancient traditions and a deep understanding of the secret messages of the spirits. She described how the stars in the sky lined up in a particular pattern on the night Clarissa appeared on the tribe's border, how the winds of change brought with them unusual scents and sounds, and how the animals in the forests showed unusual behavior. All of these, she said, were signs that could not be ignored. Her words gradually softened the atmosphere in the hall. The elders began to see Clarissa not only as an outsider, but also as part of a greater plan in which their people played a key role. The wisdom of the shamaness penetrated hearts, offering hope where before there had been only anxiety. These moments became the foundation for future decisions and the steps the tribe had to take. It was not only Clarissa's fate that was at a turning point, but the very life of the people to whom she now belonged. In the quiet, pre-dawn mist that enveloped the forest around the tribe's camp, the first warning signs appeared. Slight noises, unfamiliar rustles, and the smell of gunpowder all heralded the approach of something dangerous and unwelcome. Clarissa, still not quite recovered from the tense events of the council, felt fear clench in her chest. The news that had reached the tribe did not promise peace. The groom from her past, the man Clarissa had once tried to tie her fate to, but whose shadows haunted her, had finally found their trail. His approach meant not only a threat to her new life, but a danger to Tengala and the entire tribe that had accepted her, albeit not without doubts. The forest around them became as tense as before a thunderstorm, and even the animals became silent, sensing the change in the air. Tengala, normally calm and confident, now looked around warily, as if sensing the approach of a storm that could wash away everything in its path. His eyes met Clarissa's, and without words a spark of understanding passed between them. A battle was coming, not only for their love, but for their tribe's right to a future. Around them, among the tall trees and swaying grasses, the world of the tribe began to change. The rustling grew louder and louder, and anxiety gripped the hearts of all who lived there. There was no doubt now. The threat had reached their sacred land. Clarissa, despite her fear, felt her resolve growing within her. She knew that she could not retreat, that every second, every action mattered. For her, as for Tengala, a new phase had begun, a phase of trials where everything was at stake: their love, their destinies, and the fate of the tribe that had become her home for the first time. The silence before the storm enveloped the camp, as if preparing everyone for the coming battle, in which there would be no room for weakness. With each breath, the danger became more palpable, and the decision that faced Clarissa and Tengala left no choice but to fight and protect what they held dear. Soon the silence of the forest was broken by sharp gunshots echoing between the trees. The fiancé from Clarissa's past did not hesitate to attack, ready to forcefully reclaim what he thought was his. Tengala stood between the enemy and Clarissa, his body taut as a bow, ready to release an arrow. The clash was inevitable. Two worlds, two destinies, colliding on the border of the new and the old. The sound of gunfire was interspersed with the whistle of bullets, and sparks of anger and despair erupted all around. Tengala, defending his new family and tribe, withstood the onslaught with the courage of a warrior, but one bullet tore through his defenses, a heavy wound piercing his shoulder and chest. Blood slowly spread over his body, mixing with the ground, and for a moment everything around him stopped. Pain glittered in Tengala's eyes, but he didn't let himself fall. His will was stronger than fear and pain. In that moment, Clarissa saw not only the wounded warrior, but the man for whom she was willing to fight to the last man. Her heart filled with despair and anxiety, the fear of losing Tengala squeezing her chest in a way that felt like it was about to burst. She sank down beside him, trying to stop the bleeding, feeling every second become crucial. In that moment, the fragility of their happiness and the importance of the decisions to be made became clear. A new wave of fighting broke out around them, but for Clarissa the most important thing was to keep alive the one who had become her support and hope. This wounded warrior, despite all the threats, was her link to the future, and now she knew that to save him she would have to go through fire and water. A real storm was brewing inside Clarissa. Tengala's wound wasn't just physical pain, it was a heavy reminder of the fragility of their new life: fear, anxiety, and tribal responsibility. All these feelings wove together into a complex knot that choked her from the inside out. Her heart was torn between her love for Tengala, which had given her hope and strength, and her duty to the people who had already accepted her as one of their own. But at the same time, she felt the inexorable call of reason. The danger looming over them demanded sacrifice and decisive action. The realization came gradually, like a cold wind getting under her skin. To protect Tengala and preserve the chance for their future, a choice had to be made that was breaking her inner world. She had to leave the tribe for the time being, to go to the city, where the threats and secrets of her past lurked. This step was difficult, almost impossible. The unknown lay ahead, the fear of being rejected and alone in a foreign world. But rejection would mean death for Tengala and the end of everything they had started together. Fear and determination, the pain of inevitability and glimmers of hope struggled in her soul. A choice that seemed like a betrayal of herself was her only chance for salvation. Clarissa realized that to preserve her love and protect those she loved, she had to dare to take this step, despite her fears and doubts. It was a struggle not only with external enemies, but also with herself, for the right to be happy and free. The decision came hard, but it was inevitable. Clarissa realized that not only the fate of Tengala depended on her action, but also the future of the tribe that had so fragilely begun to accept her as their own. To go to the city would mean returning to a world where suspicion and coldness awaited her, but to refuse would mean condemning her beloved to perdition. The parting was filled with conflicting emotions. Tengala, though weakened by his injury, looked at her with pride and quiet support. He silently accepted her choice, realizing that this step was an act of love and sacrifice. The tribe, in the form of those who had already begun to see her as more than an outsider, also said goodbye with hope and trepidation. Fear hung in the air, fear of losing each other, fear that the town would reject her, that the past would not let go, that justice would not be served. But determination burned in Clarissa's heart. She knew there were dangers and trials ahead, but she also understood only through this journey could Tengala's name be cleared and give them both a chance at peace. As she packed for the journey, she was not only saying goodbye to people, but also to a part of herself that was already part of the new world. Now she was to be tested in the old world, full of shadows and suspicion, where her every move would be in the crosshairs. The wind rustled quietly in the leaves of the trees, as if seeing her off. Clarissa's soul was a mixture of anxiety and hope, fear and faith. She was moving forward not only to save Tengala, but also to build a bridge between the two worlds that might one day be a path for many. Love, stronger than all fears, drove Clarissa to take this step. She knew that all that bound her to Tengala was not mere sentiment, but a deep trust in his honor and fortitude. That trust was stronger than any words or promises. It was what gave her the courage to throw herself into the unknown. The decision to go into the city was not just an act of salvation, but a challenge to everything she knew about herself and the world around her. There, in the stone and dusty streets where cruelty and prejudice ruled, she was a stranger. And now, alone, she would go there, not as a fugitive, but as a defender of her love and truth. Clarissa realized that what lay ahead was not only danger from those who wished to harm Tengala, but also possible betrayal from those she had once trusted. The world she had grown up in did not spare the weak, and she could become easy prey for ill wishers. Every step forward was a risk. Danger could lurk at every corner, and her past had not let her forget how cruel and ruthless this city could be. Still, love gave her the strength to hold on, to keep going despite her fear and uncertainty. Clarissa felt that not only Tengala's fate was at stake, but her own future as well. It was a test that would change her forever, a choice between safety and struggle, between fear and hope. She walked to the city with a heavy heart, but with fire in her soul, realizing the risk is great, but love is above all obstacles. It was the only way to try to save not only the one she loved, but also their common world, which could still be built from the wreckage of the past and fear. Clarissa left the tribe's camp under the cover of early morning, when the first rays of the sun were just touching the tops of the trees, coloring the forest in soft shades of golden light. There was silence all around, as if nature itself was holding its breath, escorting her on this journey of uncertainty and danger. Each step was heavy with determination and inner struggle. She was leaving alone, but with a burning fire in her soul that did not allow her to doubt. Tengal's gaze was weak as he looked after the departing woman, his wound making itself felt, stiffening his strength, but his faith was unshakable. His eyes, in spite of the pain, expressed gratitude and hope, as if he were conveying to her, through this silent bond, all the strength of his soul. They both realized that the separation would not be the end, but only the beginning of a new test that each of them would have to pass. The forest, as if it were the guardian of their destinies, surrounded Clarissa with its tranquility and stark beauty, reminding her that there was not only hardship and struggle ahead, but also the possibility of rebirth. The wind quietly ruffled the leaves as if whispering words of encouragement, and the birds in the distance began their morning hymn of life and hope. A sense of inevitability hung over them. Trials were coming not only from external enemies, but also from inner doubts, fears, and betrayals. The journey would be difficult, and each step would require willpower and faith. But at the same time, there was a subtle chord of hope in this farewell. For there, in a city of threats and fears, Clarissa carried not only risk, but also a chance to save love, to weave their destinies together, to break down the barriers erected by the past. Her departure was not a flight, but a courageous choice, a choice that could change everything. Tengel remained in the shade of the trees, watching her disappear into the dawn, and knew in his heart that their destinies were now linked by an unbreakable thread that neither distance nor adversity could break. This moment was the beginning of a new chapter filled with intense anticipation, inner struggle, and quiet hope. The fate of the tribe and their love now depended on the courage of one person willing to face danger to save the one who had become everything to her. Clarissa returned to the city, which now seemed foreign and hostile to her. The narrow streets, the houses with peeling paint, the faces of the passers-by full of suspicion and dislike. All this fell upon her like cold rain. She walked along the dusty sidewalks, feeling the whispers and sharp glances spreading behind her. Rumors about her, like a deadly wind, penetrated every corner of the city. They called her crazy, said she was delusional, that her mind was ravaged by loneliness and fear. No one wanted to believe her words. No one wanted to hear the truth she brought with her from the tribe. The eyes of passers-by were cold and unfriendly, and her heart shrank with loneliness and hopelessness. But deep down, Clarissa kept her resolve. She had not come here to fall, but to fight. Clarissa found herself the center of attention, but not the kind of attention she was expecting. People gathered around her, and instead of sympathy, there was laughter. Cruel, mocking laughter. Her every word was taken as the ravings of a madwoman, and the crowd made no secret of their condemnation. Whispers denounced her as unreliable and dangerous to society. The authorities, eager to break her spirit, took every opportunity to cast Clarissa in the most vulnerable light. They called her a harlot, low and lecherous, trying to discredit her in the eyes of the people and plant a shadow of doubt on her honor and dignity. Despite this, there was a fire of unconquerable will burning in her eyes, an inner strength that would not let her give up despite the bitterness of humiliation and public scorn. This moment was the test Clarissa had to pass to prove her truth. The sheriff took the floor as if he were a lawman, not a servant of the law. His voice was loud and confident, but his words were soaked with lies and malice. Without a shadow of a doubt, he declared Clarissa a liar, accusing her of crimes she had not committed. Every statement he made was carefully twisted, as if the stick had been twisted just enough to break. He molded her into the image of a flawed woman not worthy of trust and respect, showing her to be dishonest and inadequate in the eyes of the public. The auditorium, filled with eager listeners eager for judgment, seemed to heat up to a fever pitch. Each word of the sheriff widened the gulf between Clarissa and the possibility of justice. It seemed that in this town the judgment was decided in advance, and her truth would simply dissolve under the pressure of lies and prejudice. The day of the trial had arrived, and it was as if the city had gathered at one point, in the hall where Clarissa's fate was to be decided. The faces around them were stern, full of judgment and intolerance. The locals had come not to hear the truth, but to witness her downfall. The atmosphere was dense and pressurized, as if the air was saturated with prejudice and resentment. Listening to accusations that seemed an insurmountable mountain, Clarissa felt everything inside clench with despair. But somewhere deep in her heart there still smoldered the fire of fortitude. Despite all the blows of fate, she held her ground, gathering strength to resist the injustice that seemed to hang over her like a fate. Every moment of this agonizing wait was filled with hope, albeit fragile, but alive. At the most critical moment, when everything seemed to be settled, an unexpected event shook the courtroom and the whole city. Tengala appeared on the threshold, wounded but unshaken, on horseback, as if he were the embodiment of determination and courage. His appearance caused a momentary shock. The people froze. The officials did not know how to react to such a challenge to the established order. Tengala stood straight despite the pain, and his eyes radiated genuine sincerity and faith in Clarissa. He spoke an oath, a promise to give his life for her honor and freedom, bearing witness to a truth that no one dared voice aloud. That moment was a turning point. Fear and doubt began to recede, giving way to hope, and a new breath of justice filled the air. In the midst of the tense trial, when voices and glances were about to decide Clarissa's fate, there was a sudden loud gunshot in the sky. It was a warning sign. One of the opponents, perhaps the sheriff himself, was trying to silence everyone, to stop Tengala's unexpected intervention and regain control of the situation. The sound of a gunshot pierced the silence, causing the crowd to freeze. A sharp tension hung in the air, as if time had stopped for a moment, giving everyone a chance to realize what was happening. That shot symbolized a turning point, not only in the trial, but also in Clarissa's fate. People began to see things differently. The atmosphere gradually changed, giving the truth a chance to break through the darkness of accusations and prejudice. The court session was suddenly interrupted. The crowd held its breath. A sharp shot into the sky erupted from the crowd. The sound seems to break the tension, filling the space with new meaning. All eyes turned to the figure of Tengala, standing on his horse in the middle of the square, unwavering and determined. The sheriff, realizing the change in mood, freezes and the atmosphere begins to change. New hope breaks through the darkness of accusations, and the outcome of the battle for truth and love begins to take an unexpected turn. The city, which only a short time ago seemed dead in its grey routine, was now engulfed in flames of discontent and anger. The streets, usually frighteningly empty, were filled with voices, whispers, whisperings that quickly turned into shouting. People who had long endured injustice and lies finally came out of the shadows to make themselves heard. With each passing hour, tensions rose. The slightest occasion could be a spark, an explosion that would shatter the old order. Clarissa's supporters, those who believed in truth and justice, met the sheriff's guards guarding the foundations of power. Groups sprang up in the streets, each ready to stand up for what was right, and it turned into a real battle for the future. The gunfight erupted suddenly, like thunder on a clear day. Bullets ricocheted off the walls of buildings, the noise of gunfire mixed with the shouting and clanking of weapons. People were falling, but no one wanted to retreat. The flames of inner struggle and determination were burning. The old streets of the city turned into a battlefield. Every house, every corner became an arena of struggle for the right to live without fear and deceit. Dust and smoke rose into the air, mingling with the smell of gunpowder and sweat. In this turmoil, people lost their faces, becoming only voices and movements, the embodiment of rebellion. A feeling hung in the air that something was changing forever. The city that had long seemed a fortress of injustice was about to collapse. The riot was more than an outburst of anger. It was a cry of the soul, a desire for freedom and the right to live. In the midst of the chaos and the roar of gunfire, as the city became a seething cauldron of fear and hatred, a man whose face was familiar to Clarissa from her childhood appeared. An old friend of her father's, a veteran of many years, whose faith in truth and honor was unshakable. His appearance brought an unexpected twist to the commotion. People, noticing him, began to listen. His words, spoken with the confidence and gravity of years, were like a thunderclap through the streets. He had revealed a secret that had long been hidden. The sheriff, the same man who had accused Clarissa, schemed and set traps, had one goal: to marry her for control of her family's lands. This admission was a blow to those who believed the sheriff. Doubt began to creep into the hearts of even Clarissa's most ardent opponents. His words sounded like a challenge, like an awakening that demanded action. Clarissa's support began to grow like a fire caught in the winds of change. People who were tired of lies and injustice found new hope and a reason to fight on. This recognition was the catalyst that changed the balance of power and influenced the course of the fight for truth. As the streets of the city were engulfed in fire and the sound of gunfire, the clash reached its climax. The sheriff, who until the last moment had tried to hold on to power and control, found himself in the center of deadly danger. His steps grew slower, and his gaze grew more and more blank. In the midst of the chaos, a single bullet pierced the silence and found its target. The sheriff was badly wounded. His face contorted in pain, and even the cruelest grip of power could not hold him any longer. Slowly, with difficulty, he realized that this was the end. His death was not just a physical passing, but a symbol of the fall of the old, corrupt system that kept the city in fear and subjugation. With each breath of the dying man, the past passed away, bringing hope for a new era. For Clarissa, the moment was filled with intense drama. It was as if the last barriers that had kept her and Tengel from building their lives were being torn down. Old fears and chains were crumbling, opening the way for freedom and rebirth. It wasn't just the death of a man, it was a liberation, the birth of a new chapter to be written together. After the sheriff's death, the town had descended into chaos and confusion. Clarissa and Tengala knew it was no longer possible to stay here, but now their flight was no longer a flight from fear or threat, but the beginning of a new journey. They were leaving the city not as disparate individuals, but as one, bound together by love, trust, and determination. Every step they took was filled with strength and hope, a sense of liberation from past chains. The air seemed clearer, even though there was the unknown ahead, but that was where the strength lurked. They were together, and that gave them faith in a future where they could build a life on their own terms. Their journey was not just an escape, but a step towards freedom, a freedom they had chosen for themselves, without regard for fears or previous limitations. Each new dawn promised the beginning of a new story where they could be happy. They walked away, leaving behind them the blazing lights and smoke that rose above the city, where old orders and lies were being destroyed. Behind them they left ruins, symbols of the old world that held back their dreams and freedom. Each step was a declaration of the beginning of a new life, of the readiness to face any challenge that fate would present. Inside, Clarissa and Tengala burned a quiet but indomitable flame of hope and faith that not only struggle but happiness lay ahead. The air around them was filled with freshness and possibility, as if nature itself had welcomed their choice. There were no old shackles here, only space for the dreams and plans they were now making together. It was the first step toward freedom, a step toward becoming masters of their own destiny. The silence around them was not empty. It was filled with the promise of a new beginning, of rebirth, of the flame that now burned within the two of them. Clarissa holds a newborn baby boy in her arms, a symbol of a new beginning, a new life that grew out of fear and struggle. In the small tribal village where calm and peace have finally prevailed, her face radiates not just joy, but deep peace. Surrounded by those who have become her family and support, she finds the strength that does not require violence, but is born of love and acceptance. Every breath of a mother, every touch of a child is like a silent ritual of rebirth, a promise of a new path where the past of pain is replaced by the light of hope. It is not just a child, it is an heir to a destiny, a new chapter in a life that now belongs to her alone. Several months have passed, and in the quiet of the tribal village, unexpected news arrives that Clarissa had hardly hoped for. Her father, a man whose views and heart seemed unshakable, has changed under the weight of his experiences. Secretly, without noise or loud words, he sends her a sign, a small scroll fastened with a ribbon, carried by trusted men. This gesture is not just a message, but a symbol of forgiveness and recognition. In it is hidden the recognition of her choice, respect for her strength, and her right to happiness. A message from her father is a bridge that connects the past and the future, allowing her to let go of resentments and open the doors of a new life where love and respect become the main pillars. Clarissa feels how this small token gives her more confidence and inspiration to move forward, building her future according to her own rules. Clarissa stands by a calm river where the water gently caresses the shore, reflecting the light of the morning sun. This place seems to represent her inner transformation. Here, on the edge of the past and future, she finds harmony with herself and the world around her. No longer are imposed obligations and other people's expectations determining her destiny. Now it is her own choice, her own power and freedom. Clarissa's gaze is fixed on the life she is building with love and determination. In this quiet moment, she feels whole, ready to embrace all the challenges and joys that the new chapter of her destiny will bring. The river flows on, as does her path, open and full of hope. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you liked it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more exciting dramas and unexpected twists and turns to come. Your opinion is very important. Leave a comment. We are interested to know what you think. See you soon.